St. Michael's Hospital in Colorado Springs smells like antiseptic and floor wax, that particular blend that lives in the lungs of anyone who works pediatrics for longer than a month. Katie Morrison has worked pediatrics for longer than a month. 8 years, actually. 8 years of watching fluorescent lights hum in B-flat above hospital beds, watching children stare at nothing when they should be staring at cartoons, watching parents age 3 decades in a single afternoon. The pediatric ward on the 4th floor is quieter than most places. Quieter than it should be. 8-year-old Miguel Reyes lies in room for 12 with sheets pulled up to his collarbone and eyes that don't track movement anymore. His father, Commander Marcus Reyes, sits in a wheelchair beside the bed with no legs below the knee and a face carved from granite. Katie adjusts the bedsheets with the precision of someone who learned medicine not from textbooks but from field trauma under fire. Her hands move with absolute economy. No wasted motion. No flourish. The kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst. Miguel's paralysis is complete from the thoracic spine down. 2 months in and he hasn't spoken more than 15 words. Not to his father. Not to the nurses. Not to the 5 attending physicians who cycle through his care with the grim efficiency of men and women who've learned to stop expecting miracles. Katie checks the catheter line, the position of the cervical collar that keeps his neck stable, the oxygen saturation reading on the monitor beside his bed. 94%. Acceptable. Not good. Not bad. The scar on Miguel's forearm is 2 inches long and pink against his brown skin. Her name is tattooed there. Morrison. Not in ink, Commander Reyes had done it with a field needle and charcoal ash when Miguel was still conscious enough to understand what it meant. A brand. A promise. A reminder that someone had carried him 3 miles through sniper fire in Ramadi when the IED destroyed the entire left side of the convoy and left 6 Marines bleeding into the dust. Katie had been 26 years old then, with 2 years of combat medicine and a reputation among Delta operators as someone who didn't leave people behind. The 3-mile extraction took 47 minutes. Miguel was 7 then, conscious, crying, asking for his father. Katie had told him his father was coming. She'd told him he was going to be okay. She'd told him a lot of things that turned out to be complicated truths. Now his eyes are empty windows. Now his father sits beside him in a wheelchair and stares at the machines that breathe for his son's future. Katie finishes the bedsheet adjustment and steps back. The morning light through the window hits the scar on Miguel's arm at an angle that makes Morrison seem to glow. She touches the inside of her jacket, running her fingers across the patch sewn into the lining. Faded Marine insignia. Same patch Commander Reyes wore. Same unit. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. Dark Horse. The patch is her tell. Her one indulgence in a life built on invisibility. She's been invisible for 16 years. Invisible in 6 countries. Invisible in 3 marriages she never quite went through with. Invisible in a naval career that doesn't technically exist on any official roster anymore. Now she's invisible as a nurse named Katie Morrison at St. Michael's Hospital in Colorado Springs, and her only connection to her real self is a patch no one is supposed to see. But that's not why she's here. She's here because naval intelligence placed her here specifically, for weeks ago, with orders written in language so classified that the paper had to be burned after she read it. Someone is systematically sabotaging the recovery of wounded warriors' families. Not one case. Multiple cases. Children of medal recipients going septic on antibiotics that should have worked. Fathers with treatable injuries getting sudden complications. Mothers with surgically correctable conditions being told their cases were beyond help. The pattern had been too small to see at first. A billing error here. A missed appointment there. Delayed test results. A surgeon cancelling at the last moment. But the Pentagon had finally connected the dots, and the dots spelled sabotage, and the sabotage had a name. Dr. Marcus Pierce, attending physician at St. Michael's Hospital, with unusual billing patterns for specialized consultations that never happened. Ghost appointments. Phantom procedures. Insurance payouts that materialized regardless. $47,000 for consultations that lasted 5 minutes. $200,000 over 6 months for diagnostic reviews that weren't documented in any patient file. The fraud was almost secondary. The fraud was the trail. The real crime was simpler and deadlier. Certain patients got care. Certain patients didn't. The ones who didn't, their families used insurance, and insurance paid out, and the money went somewhere that made someone's hands very clean and their bank accounts very full. Katie's orders had been crystal clear. Observe. Document. Do not intervene. Do not reveal. Do not become emotionally involved with the patient. Katie had nodded and accepted the briefing and hadn't told them that she was already emotionally involved. That the patient was Miguel Reyes. That she'd carried Miguel Reyes 3 miles through sniper fire in Ramadi while rounds chewed up the earth around her. That she'd held his hand while he screamed that his legs wouldn't move. That she'd promised him his father was coming. That she'd meant it. That she'd delivered on that promise. That she'd never forgotten the weight of him, the fever heat of his skin, the sound of his voice calling out in Spanish for his mother. So she had come to Colorado Springs and she had become a nurse and she had begun watching Dr. Pierce with the same attention she'd once given to watching for muzzle flashes in the Jolin district. She knows his schedule. She knows his habits. She knows he walks past room for 12 every morning at 7:27 a.m. and glances at Miguel's chart without reading it. She knows he meets with the billing department on Thursdays at 2 p.m. and takes calls in his private office with the door closed and the blinds drawn. She knows he has 3 former residents who follow him like apostles and laugh at his jokes and never question his treatment recommendations. She knows he's the kind of careful that comes from careful practice. Very deliberate. Very controlled. Very unlikely to make mistakes. Dr. Pierce enters the pediatric ward at 7:46 a.m. on a Tuesday morning with 4 other attending physicians trailing behind him like remoras following a shark. He's 54 years old with the kind of haircut that costs money and the kind of watch that costs more. His shoes are Italian. His stethoscope is Littmann Cardiology 4, top of the line, the kind that costs $385. Everything about him announces that he belongs to a different order of being than the nurses who make $42,000 a year and work 12-hour shifts and spend their own money on compression socks because their feet are dying. Katie steps back from Miguel's bedside as Pierce approaches. Deference. Invisibility. The costume of the subordinate. She doesn't look up. She doesn't need to. She can feel the weight of his attention settling on her like a creature landing on a branch. He's deciding. That's what his pause means. He's deciding whether she's worth his time. Whether this is the moment to plant the first domino. Whether this is the patient whose care will be just slightly adjusted toward catastrophe. Katie understands the architecture of sabotage. She's read the cases. The pattern isn't random. The pattern targets specific families. Families with military pensions. Families with insurance settlements. Families whose children's deaths would unlock survivor benefits worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Miguel Reyes is Commander Marcus Reyes' only son. Commander Reyes has a Marine pension. He has a service disability rating. He has life insurance from the military. He has survivor benefits that would transfer to next of kin. If Miguel dies, the money flows. If Miguel dies, Dr. Pierce gets a cut. That's the theory. That's what the Pentagon believes. That's what Katie is here to prove. But that isn't the worst part. What she doesn't know yet is that this is the last morning she'll be invisible. What she doesn't know yet is that Dr. Pierce has already begun rewriting Miguel's treatment protocol. What she doesn't know yet is that in 72 hours, Miguel's oxygen levels will begin to drop for reasons no one can explain, and 5 attending physicians will look at each other with confusion, and Dr. Pierce will arrive at the bedside holding a do not resuscitate form that he claims Commander Reyes has signed, and Katie will understand in that moment that the rules have changed. That surveillance is no longer an option. That observation is no longer sufficient. that some lines, once you're in a hospital room with a dying child, simply cannot be held. Commander Reyes sits motionless beside Miguel's bed, his wheelchair positioned at a 45-degree angle, and watches Dr. Pierce move through the room with the intensity of a man who's learned to read the caliber of a threat by the way it breathes. The commander knows something is wrong. The commander can taste it. But the commander has no legs and no authority and no way to stop what's coming. He stares at Katie for just a moment when Dr. Pierce leaves the room, and Katie sees it then, the moment his eyes recognize something in her. Not her face. Not her name. Something older. Something that smells like remedy and dust and desperation. The commander's eyes ask, "Are you who I think you are?" The conference room at St. Michael's occupied the entire third-floor corner, with windows facing Pikes Peak. 24 staff members sat in tiered rows, residents, interns, nursing supervisors, respiratory therapists, all waiting for grand rounds to begin. Katie stood in the back, her badge clipped to her scrubs, her hands holding a patient chart that felt suddenly heavier than paper should weigh. Dr. Pierce entered at 0800 hours exactly. His shoes clicked against the polished concrete floor with the precision of a metronome. He wore a charcoal suit under his white coat, a diamond wedding band that caught the fluorescent light, and the kind of expression men wore when they were about to remind someone of their place in the hierarchy. He didn't acknowledge Katie. He set his leather portfolio on the podium and opened the first case file. 17 minutes into the presentation, he held up a chart. Katie recognized the tabs instantly. Pediatric ward. Room for 12. Miguel Reyes. "This one's interesting," Pierce said, his voice carrying the casual tone of someone discussing a contaminated lab sample. He held the chart sideways, as if presenting it to a jury. "Nurse Morrison here has documented, 3 separate times, her professional opinion that we should continue physical therapy for our young patient despite unanimous consensus from 5 attending physicians that further intervention would be medically futile and potentially damaging." He turned to face Katie directly. 24 pairs of eyes followed his gaze. "Tell me, Nurse Morrison, where did you complete your residency? Your fellowship? Your doctoral program?" He paused. The pause stretched like taffy. "Oh, that's right. You didn't." Polite laughter rippled through the residents. It came in waves, the kind of laughter that felt safe because authority had given permission. Katie's jaw clenched. Once. A single muscle contraction, barely visible, along the angle of her mandible. Her hands remained steady on the notepad in front of her. She met his eyes, grey eyes the color of old dishwater, and held the contact for exactly 2 seconds before looking down at her notes. She did not blink. She did not look away first. She did not speak. Pierce smiled. The smile was the smile of a man who just successfully demonstrated dominance in front of witnesses. "Moving on," he said. He set Miguel's chart down with deliberate care, as if placing evidence into a courtroom exhibit. "These boundaries exist for a reason, people. They keep us organized. They keep us professional. And they keep nurses from practicing medicine without appropriate training or credentials." Another ripple of laughter. Softer this time. Less certain. Katie walked out of the conference room at 08 for 7 hours. She did not run. She did not retreat. She walked with the same measured pace she'd used navigating IED-cleared pathways in remedy, deliberate, economical, every step calculated. Her heart rate, she noted with the detached awareness of someone trained to separate emotion from physiology, had climbed to 98 beats per minute. Her respirations remained steady at 12 per minute. Pain was information. So was anger. An hour later, she was inserting a dollar bill into the vending machine on the second floor when she heard the voices. "Dr. Pierce, please, just one more week." The first resident's voice pitched high, theatrical, mocking. "The poor paralyzed boy needs me so much." He clutched his chest with both hands, staggered backward like an actress in a community theater production. "My nursing intuition tells me." "Your nursing intuition tells you to get out of my way." The second resident finished, his voice a perfect imitation of Pierce's clipped, authoritative tone. Both residents laughed, the kind of laughter that came from belonging to the right group, knowing the right jokes, understanding who held power and who didn't. Katie selected her coffee. The machine hummed, a sound like a refrigerator in a lonely kitchen at 3 in the morning. The cup dropped. The dark liquid poured. She inserted a second dollar without acknowledging the residents. Her hand did not shake. Her jaw did not clench. She was already somewhere else, a place where this laughter was background noise, static, the ambient sound of men who'd never had to choose between following orders and saving lives. From the window of his office, visible from the vending machine alcove, Dr. Pierce watched. His chin rested on his interlaced fingers. His smile was the smile of a predator that had just confirmed its prey was wounded. That afternoon, Pierce cornered her outside Miguel's room. He materialized like a man who'd been waiting, timing his appearance with the precision of someone accustomed to orchestrating moments. His cologne preceded him, something expensive with notes of vetiver and power. "I've reviewed your file, Morrison. 6 months on this unit and you're already overstepping. Already creating friction." His voice remained conversational, as if they were discussing the weather rather than the subtext that said, "I have decided you are a problem. Question my medical judgment again and I'll have security escort you out of this building. Are we clear?" His finger rose. It tapped her shoulder once with each word, "Stay in your lane." Katie's face remained as it had remained in the conference room, granite. Immobile. Unreactive. Only her jaw moved, a tightening so imperceptible that someone standing less than 2 feet away might have missed it. But Dr. Pierce wasn't looking at her face. He was looking at her shoulders, her posture, searching for the tremor that should accompany humiliation. He didn't find it. Katie turned and walked back into Miguel's room without responding. Speech, she'd learned long ago, was a choice. Silence was a choice too. But silence had more weight. Silence made people wonder what you weren't saying. Silence suggested you were already thinking 3 moves ahead. Miguel lay in his hospital bed, his small frame diminished by the white sheets. His eyes tracked her as she entered, a reflex, just the eyes moving, not the body. His left arm rested above the blanket. The scar on his forearm caught the afternoon light. The tattoo was still dark, still crisp despite the healing skin around it, Morrison. 3 capital letters in his father's careful printing. The boy's father had done it 2 weeks ago with a sterile needle and black ink, permanent marker of a permanent debt. "Why does that lady always stare at my arm?" Miguel asked his father, who sat in the chair beside the bed, his prosthetics resting against the mattress like foreign objects he hadn't quite accepted. Commander Reyes looked at Katie. His eyes were the color of weathered steel, the color of someone who'd seen enough to understand that the world operated on principles most people never questioned. Katie didn't answer. She checked Miguel's for line, her fingers moving with the automatic precision of someone who'd done the same task approximately 847 times. She didn't count anymore. She just knew the motion, the resistance of the port, the slight give of healthy tissue beneath the needle hub. "She saved you," Commander Reyes said quietly. "You might not remember, but she saved you in Ramadi. Carried you 3 miles. Kept you breathing." Miguel stared at the tattoo. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words emerged. His eyes remained blank, the way eyes went blank when memory couldn't connect to experience. The IED had taken his spinal cord at L3. The doctors said it had nearly taken his life. What they didn't say was that between nearly's and actually there was a window of 12 minutes, and in that window, a woman named Katie Morrison had performed actions that shouldn't have been possible under fire. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was visible on Miguel's chart when Katie accessed the pediatric ward records at 0200 hours, logged in through her legitimate credentials as a floor nurse, documenting what she was supposed to be seeing in her role as observer. She sat in the records room with the chart backlit by her phone, the glow illuminating the margins where Dr. Pierce had written new orders at 2,347 hours, an order to discontinue all physical therapy, to initiate comfort care protocols, to reduce stimulation and intervention. The handwriting was precise. Controlled. The handwriting of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Katie photographed the page. Then the next one. Then the lab results showing Miguel's respiratory function, completely normal, completely stable, completely inconsistent with the declining condition that Pierce had documented in the narrative note. She uploaded the images to a secure server, the kind of secure server that didn't show up in hospital IT logs, the kind of server that existed in a space between civilian and military infrastructure. Her handler would see this. The Pentagon would see this. 5 attending physicians agreeing that a child should receive no further recovery intervention while showing no medical decline was not a consensus. It was a conspiracy. It was systematic. And Katie had now documented enough evidence to answer the question that naval intelligence had planted her here to answer: was Dr. Pierce running some kind of operation? She returned to the pediatric ward at 0210 hours. The night shift was minimal, 1 RN, 1 CNA, the sound of monitors beeping their steady rhythms like electronic insects in the dark. Miguel's room was dark. The boy slept with his mouth slightly open, his small chest rising and falling at a rate of 22 breaths per minute. Normal. Healthy. Completely inconsistent with comfort care. Katie's eyes tracked to the monitor. She could order the continuation of physical therapy. She had the credentials to do it. She had the medical knowledge to justify it. She had the authority. She pulled out her phone to call Commander Reyes, to alert him that something was deeply wrong, but the night shift nurse appeared in the doorway with the sudden materialization of someone trained to move quietly through hospitals. Dr. Pierce said you're not to modify any orders on this patient, the nurse said. Her voice carried no malice, just the exhausted recitation of instruction. He was very specific. Said if you made any changes, he'd know about it. Katie slid her phone back into her pocket. Understood. But her eyes remained on Miguel's monitor, watching the numbers, counting the breaths, calculating the trajectory of a child whose medical chart said he was dying while everything visible said he was healing. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed their constant electrical drone, a sound like the world's smallest generator struggling against the dark. The wheelchair came fast down the hallway at 0600, the kind of speed that made nurses look up from their charts. Commander Reyes rolled toward Miguel's room with his jaw set hard, the muscles in his shoulders taut against the fabric of his dress uniform, blues pressed sharp enough to cut, medals aligned like a row of small truths nobody wanted to hear. Katie was checking the night vitals when she heard the chair wheels squeak to a stop outside the glass partition. Captain Morrison, he said. Not nurse. Captain. The word landed like a test, and Katie's hand stilled on Miguel's for line, fingers still wrapped around the plastic connector but her mind already calculating distance, exits, whether her cover was about to shatter before her eyes. She stepped into the hallway. The fluorescent lights overhead cast everything in that pale institutional wash that made everyone look slightly dead. Commander Reyes stared at her for a long moment, and in that moment she understood he knew something had shifted. Dr. Pierce came to my hotel room last night, he said. His voice carried the weight of someone used to giving orders that didn't get questioned. Said Miguel's kidneys are failing. Said the proteins in his urine crossed a threshold that means we're looking at end-stage renal disease. Said it's time to let him go peacefully. He paused. The hallway was empty except for the distant beeping of monitors. He had me sign a DNR form. Do not resuscitate. Said emotionally, I probably already knew it was the right choice. Katie's face remained still. Composure was a weapon. Composure was what won wars. Sir, she said, keeping her voice level, what were Miguel's lab values from last night? I don't know the exact numbers, Reyes said. Creatinine 0.8. Bun 14. Urine protein trace. All normal. She pulled up the electronic chart on the hallway computer, angling the screen so he could see the values in black and white. The numbers were clean. Recent. Timestamped at 2,200 hours, just 8 hours before Pierce visited. His kidneys are functioning exactly as expected for a child his age. There's no end-stage renal disease. There's no clinical deterioration. Commander Reyes stared at the screen, then back at Katie. His hands gripped the wheels of his chair so hard his knuckles went white. He also told me, Reyes continued, that you've been making medical decisions about my son without consulting the attending physician. Said you've become emotionally involved. Said your judgment is compromised. He looked at her directly now, and she could see the conflict moving behind his eyes like storm clouds building. He said you're overstepping your scope of practice. The words hung there. Katie had trained for interrogations. She'd held her composure under fire in Ramadi when rounds were popping overhead like angry wasps. But standing in a hospital hallway while a Marine commander, a man whose son she'd carried through sniper fire, whose name was tattooed on that boy's arm, questioned her integrity required a different kind of stillness. I follow physician orders, sir, Katie said. Every single one. I don't make decisions. I execute them. But I'm asking you not to sign that DNR. Not yet. Request a second opinion. Request 3 second opinions. Get another nephrologist in here. Let them look at these labs themselves. Reyes studied her face for what felt like a tactical eternity. His breathing was controlled, military precise. She could see him calculating, weighing, trying to reconcile what Pierce had told him against what the evidence was showing him and what his instincts were screaming. Okay, he said finally. I won't sign it without another doctor reviewing it first. The tension in Katie's chest released by maybe 5%. Enough to breathe. Not enough to relax. That afternoon, Pierce made his move. The intercom crackled at 1,400 hours, Katie's name, report to the nursing director's office immediately. She rode the elevator down 3 floors with her unit patch burning like a coal against her ribs, that faded scrap of fabric beneath her scrubs the only thing keeping her tethered to who she actually was. Pierce was standing there with the charge nurse, Patricia Chen, a good nurse with 23 years of experience and a habit of following protocol because protocol kept people safe. Captain Morrison's reassignment is effective immediately, Pierce said, not to Katie but around her, as if she were a specimen under examination rather than a person standing in the room. Hospital Policy 47B requires appropriate patient-to-nurse ratios. She's developed an unhealthy attachment to the Reyes case, and her emotional involvement is compromising her clinical objectivity. Surgical flaw, effective now. Patricia, please remove her from the pediatric rotation. Katie's hands hung at her sides. Her jaw clenched once. That was the only movement she allowed herself. I understand, doctor, she said. The deferential nurse voice. The mask. I'll gather my things. She was halfway to the elevator when her phone buzzed. The alert came through in red letters across the screen, Miguel Reyes, code blue, room for 07. Her legs moved before her brain caught up. Muscle memory. Combat training. The elevator was too slow, so she took the stairs 3 at a time, her shoes slapping against the concrete with the rhythm of old deployments, moving fast through the stairwell door and down the hallway toward Miguel's room where every monitor within 50 feet was screaming. But Pierce was standing in the doorway. Just standing there. Blocking the frame like a linebacker. You're no longer assigned to this patient, Pierce said. His voice carried the smooth confidence of someone who believed he'd already won. Inside the room, Katie could hear the alarms. The code blue announcements. Voices calling out medications. 5 doctors are handling this. Your presence would be a liability. Katie stopped. Her hands curled into fists, then released. Released again. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint. Let me in, she said. No. The monitor inside the room flatlined. Not a steady rhythm. A flat line. The sound it made was like silence multiplied by electrical noise, a void that swallowed everything else. Katie stepped back. She moved toward the waiting room because engaging now would blow her cover, and if her cover was blown, naval intelligence would pull her before she could prove what Pierce was actually doing. Before she could prove that he was systematically destroying evidence. Before she could prove that somewhere in this hospital's billing records, Dr. Pierce had created a deliberate pattern of phantom consultations while withholding actual care, maximizing the hospital's insurance payouts from patients who died early. At midnight, the hospital slept in that half-conscious way that hospitals do, alarms still chirping, fluorescent lights still humming, but the daytime chaos gone to ground. Katie sat in the records room on the third sublevel, in a corner carved out by filing cabinets and the electrical hum of backup generators, accessing patient files that Pierce didn't know she could see because nobody knew that the captain working night shift as a nurse had Pentagon-level database clearance. The smell of old paper and industrial solvent hung thick in the room. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with the precision of someone who'd hacked military intelligence databases in Kandahar. She pulled up the billing records first, the Medicare claims that Pierce had submitted for specialized pediatric consultations over the past 18 months. The pattern was there. Impossible to miss once you knew to look for it. 17 patient files. All pediatric. All had parents connected to military personnel. All showed identical billing patterns, premium consultations charged at $3,200 per visit, consultations that never appeared in the patient's actual medical records, consultations that Pierce had billed to Medicare using credentials and timestamps that made them look legitimate to the automated systems. But the real evidence was in the medical records themselves. Katie cross-referenced each billing date with the actual treatment notes. Every single time Pierce had billed for a specialized consultation, the actual medical care had been systematically scaled back. Physical therapy discontinued. Medication regimen simplified. Visits to specialists cancelled. On paper, it looked like protocol adjustments. In practice, it looked like a man watching children decline while getting paid for fake consultations that never happened. Miguel's file was there. Consultations billed but never documented. His therapy order discontinued the same week a phantom consultation was submitted to Medicare. Katie pulled up another file. A 7-year-old named Sarah Chen, no relation to the charge nurse, daughter of a retired Army colonel. Same pattern. Consultations billed. Care withheld. Medical decline accelerated by design. Another file. Marcus Thompson. Son of a Navy SEAL. Billed, declined, discharged to hospice after 6 months of carefully managed deterioration. 17 children. 17 families. The hospital was getting paid for care that never happened while the children got care that was systematically denied. It was insurance fraud scaled across a small human population, and the profit margin was measured in lives. Katie documented everything. Screenshots. Cross-references. Timestamps. Her hands moved across the keyboard with the same precision they used for emergency field thoracotomies, mechanical and focused and separated from the rage that was building somewhere beneath her ribs like a second heartbeat. By 0300 hours, she had the evidence. By 0400 hours, she'd backed it up to 3 separate encrypted servers. By 0500 hours, she was sitting in her car in the hospital parking lot, watching the sky turn the color of wet concrete, wondering if Commander Reyes was still awake with his son. The night nurse, someone else, not Katie, had called the code at 1400 hours. The 5 doctors had arrived. Miguel's heart had restarted after 7 minutes. The boy was in the pediatric ICU now, sedated, on a ventilator, alive by a margin so small it could have been measured in fractions of a second. But Katie wasn't assigned to him anymore. She was off the case. She was off the floor. She was off the hospital entirely if Pierce had his way, and right now, sitting in her car watching the morning come up over Colorado Springs, it looked very much like Pierce was getting his way. What none of them knew was that by tomorrow morning, everything Pierce had built would be under investigation. What none of them knew was that Katie had already sent the files to a secure email address at the Pentagon. What none of them knew was that the quiet nurse they dismissed was going to bring the entire operation down. But first, Miguel had to survive the night. The monitors started screaming at 2:11 a.m. Katie was in the break room, staring at cold coffee and the faded unit patch she'd sewn into her jacket lining, the 3rd Battalion insignia that matched the one Commander Reyes wore, when the overhead system crackled, code blue, pediatric ICU, Bay 4. She didn't move. That wasn't her patient anymore. Pierce had reassigned her that afternoon, had pulled her name from Miguel's chart with a smile that looked like a shark showing its teeth. But she was moving anyway. The coffee cup clattered against the tile floor, a sound like dropped ammunition casings. Her feet carried her toward the ICU before her brain caught up. Miguel's room was empty of doctors. All 5 attending physicians mysteriously unavailable at 2:19 a.m. on a Saturday night. The code button had been pressed but no code team appeared. Katie stood in the doorway and took in the scene with the clarity that came from having triage casualties in a city where mortars fell randomly, the boy's chest motionless, his lips the color of slate, his pupils fixed and dilated. The ventilator still cycled air into his lungs but his oxygen saturation was falling, 88, 83, 79, because something inside had failed catastrophically and there was no one coming to fix it. "What are you doing in here?" Dr. Pierce's voice cut across the room like a scalpel. He stood in the doorway behind her, blocking the path to the ICU corridor. In his hands was a clipboard. On it, a form with Commander Reyes' signature at the bottom. A DNR form. Do not resuscitate. Written in Pierce's handwriting. Signed by a father who'd spoken to Katie 6 hours earlier and said his son was a fighter, that Miguel was going to walk again, that he'd promised his boy a dog when they got home. Katie's jaw clenched. That was it. That was the only part of her that moved. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint. "Step back, doctor." Her voice had dropped an octave. "No, please. No apology. Orders, not requests." The voice of Captain Catherine Morrison, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, the woman who'd held a hemorrhaging child against her chest and run 3 miles through sniper fire while rounds cracked past her helmet. "I'm calling security." Pierce was already reaching for his radio. "You're not authorized." Katie stepped past him hard enough that his shoulder cracked against the door frame. She heard him stumble, heard the clipboard hit the floor. Behind her, his voice rose. "That's practicing medicine without a license." That's... She didn't hear the rest. She was already moving. The surgical tray sat beside Miguel's bed with supplies from the failed code attempt. The crash team had arrived at some point, had tried, had given up because the attending physicians never showed. Katie's hands didn't hesitate. She grabbed the 10-blade scalpel, felt the weight of it settle into her palm like it was made for this moment, and her fingers moved with the muscle memory of Ramadi, of the forward operating base near Jolan district where she'd learned that sometimes the only difference between alive and dead was willingness to cut. She positioned the blade between Miguel's 4th and 5th ribs, felt for the intercostal space, and made the incision in one smooth motion. The scalpel sang through tissue. Blood welled up dark and real and necessary. She opened the pericardium, the sac around the heart, and her hand slipped inside the boy's chest cavity. The heart was there, small, rigid, useless, and she started compressions. 1, 2, 3. The mechanical rhythm of combat. Push air. Move blood. Keep neurons firing. Call a code, she shouted without looking up. Get EPI push now. 1 milligram 4. The heart was like warm clay in her hand. Nothing. 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 4. 5. 6. What are you doing? Pierce was screaming from the doorway, his voice cracking. Stop. You're practicing medicine without a license. This is 7. 8. 9. The heart stuttered. Flickered. Caught. Miguel's back arched. His eyes snapped open. The ventilator filled his lungs with oxygen and this time, his body took it. His chest rose. His oxygen saturation climbed, 68, 72, 81, 88. His heart rate appeared on the monitor, irregular at first, then steadying into sinus rhythm at 112 beats per minute. The code team burst through the doors, for nurses in scrubs with a crash cart. They saw Katie standing over Miguel with her hand inside his chest, saw the boy gasping, saw the monitors displaying a living child. Katie stepped back. He needed a thoracotomy. Heart was in asystole. Manual compression restored rhythm. He's been down approximately 5 minutes. One of the nurses, a woman named Chen who'd been kind to Katie in the cafeteria, stared at her. Then she moved to the boy, placing a proper monitor, checking airways, moving into the choreography of professional medicine. Behind them, Pierce was already on his phone. His voice carried through the room like poison. Yes, I need to file an immediate complaint about a nurse who just performed surgical intervention without authorization in direct violation of hospital policy. Her name is Katie Morrison. She's in the pediatric ICU, Bay 4, right now. This is a patient safety emergency. Katie didn't watch him. She watched Miguel's monitors instead. O2 saturation climbing, 92, 95, 97. Heart rate settling into a normal sinus rhythm. The boy was breathing. The boy was alive. By 4:15 a.m., Miguel was stabilized, sedated, his chest packed with surgical bandages and scheduled for proper surgical closure in the operating room. By 6:16 a.m., the hospital's legal department had contacted Katie. By 8:44 a.m., her badge was deactivated. The HR director sat across from her in a small office on the 3rd floor, the kind of room built specifically for firing people. Her name was Sandra Martinez, and she wouldn't meet Katie's eyes. Dr. Pierce has filed a formal complaint, Sandra said quietly, sliding a printed form across the desk. He's documented 3 violations of our scope of practice policy, specifically Hospital Regulation 47B, which prohibits nursing staff from performing surgical procedures without direct physician supervision and authorization. The child was dying. Katie's voice was flat. Factual. All 5 attending physicians were unavailable. There was a forged DNR form. The code team wasn't responding. Dr. Pierce has 5 attending physicians who are willing to testify that they responded immediately to the code alert and that you, Sandra's voice dropped lower, that you interfered with their treatment protocol and endangered the patient by performing an authorized surgical intervention. Katie knew exactly what had happened. Pierce had called them after he called security. Had told them the story he needed them to tell. Had made the phone calls that turned 5 doctors into 5 witnesses for his defense. That was competence. That was institutional power working like a machine. Where are they? Katie asked quietly. They're preparing statements. Their testimonies, combined with the 2 resident physicians who've documented instances of your insubordination at the vending machine and in the hallway, create a clear pattern of scope creep and disregard for hospital hierarchy. Sandra slid another form across the desk. This is your termination notice. It's effective immediately. We're requesting your badge, your credentials, and access codes. Security will escort you from the building. Katie picked up the pen. Her hand was steady. It wasn't because she was calm. It was because she'd held steadier things together in worse places. She signed her name. Captain Catherine Morrison became just Katie Morrison, fired nurse, in the space of a signature. The security guard walked her to the parking lot. The morning was cold, the kind of Colorado dawn where frost still covered the windows at 8:02 a.m. She sat in her car for exactly 3 minutes, her hands on the steering wheel, and let the weight of operational failure settle on her shoulders like body armor. She'd blown her cover. She'd gotten herself terminated. Naval intelligence would pull her within hours, the mission was compromised, the asset exposed. Miguel was alive, yes, but Pierce was still in the hospital. Pierce was still billing phantom consultations. Pierce was still systematically sabotaging the recovery of wounded warriors' families, and now Katie had no position to investigate him from, no access to his records, no way to gather the evidence the Pentagon needed. She drove Highway 24 in darkness that felt like punishment. At 3:13 a.m., she hadn't slept, had just driven in circles. She pulled into a diner called Marie's. The kind of place that never closed, the kind where you could sit alone and watch your reflection deteriorate in the window glass. The coffee was bitter and cold by the time the sun came up. Katie sat in a corner booth and stared at her hands. These hands had held lives together. These hands had carried a bleeding child 3 miles through sniper fire. These hands had reached inside a boy's chest and forced his heart to beat. And they'd managed to change nothing. Except Miguel was alive. That part was real. That part mattered. But it wasn't enough, and Katie Morrison, Captain Catherine Morrison, Guardian Actual, the woman the Pentagon had placed inside St. Michael's Hospital to bring down a conspiracy, sat alone in a diner and faced the possibility that she'd just killed her mission to save one boy when there were 17 others still in the hospital's files. 17 other children. 17 other families being slowly bled dry by a doctor with institutional protection and 5 attending physicians willing to lie under oath. She touched the unit patch through the fabric of her jacket. 3rd Battalion. Dark Horse. The call sign came from somewhere in her chest, Angel 6. The one who saved people. The one who never left anyone behind. The one who'd just blown her only chance to save them all. By morning, Katie's badge wouldn't scan. The magnetic strip had been deactivated at 11:38 p.m., according to the timestamp on the email waiting in her inbox when she woke. Subject line, immediate termination, scope of practice violation. Dr. Pierce had worked fast. Very fast. HR had called at 6 a.m. A woman named Sandra, her voice tight and apologetic, reading from a script that Pierce had clearly written. We received multiple reports of unlicensed medical practice. A complaint was filed by Dr. Pierce and corroborated by 2 residents. The hospital's legal counsel recommends immediate separation to limit liability. Katie didn't argue. Arguing would draw attention. Arguing would keep her here longer, and that was exactly what Pierce wanted, a distraction while he erased the rest. You'll need to return your credentials by end of business today, Sandra said. Security has been notified. Katie hung up without responding. She'd already lost the window. Naval intelligence would pull her within the hour once they learned her cover was burned. Her mission, the real mission, the one that mattered, was over. Pierce had made sure of it. She sat in the diner on Highway 24, 3 miles from the hospital, at 3 a.m. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical lullaby overhead. The coffee in her cup had gone the color of rust, a thin skin forming on top. Outside the window, the parking lot was empty. A semi-truck slowed at the red light, its air brakes hissing like something wounded, and kept moving. Katie stared at her reflection in the dark glass. A woman in civilian clothes. A woman without a badge. A woman who'd had one job, keep Miguel Reyes alive long enough to expose the conspiracy, and had failed. She'd saved his life once, 3 miles through sniper fire with his small body pressed against her chest, his blood mixing with hers on the streets of Ramadi. But she couldn't save him here. Couldn't prove that Dr. Pierce was systematically murdering the children of wounded warriors. Couldn't stop the conspiracy from spreading to the next hospital, the next base, the next family. The unit patch was still in her jacket lining, sewn there by her mother 23 years ago. She touched it through the fabric. The same insignia that Commander Reyes wore on his shoulder. The same badge of the unit that had trained her to never leave anyone behind. She'd left Miguel behind. The trembling in her hands wasn't fear. It was the burn of restraint, the effort of not driving back to that hospital and burning it down with her bare hands. But restraint was all she had left. The hospital board meeting started at 9 a.m. Pierce stood at the head of the conference table, his hand steady, his voice measured and reasonable. This is a difficult situation, he was saying, but we have a duty to protect our institution from liability. Captain Morrison, or Ms. Morrison, I should say, exceeded her scope of practice in a way that endangered our patient and exposed St. Michael's to significant legal risk. I've documented the violations thoroughly. I believe termination was the only appropriate response. The board members nodded. They'd already made their decision. Pierce had made sure of that too. The doors burst open. Marcus stood in the doorway, 17 years old, still in his high school varsity jacket, his hands shaking so badly the medals nearly fell. The Navy Cross hung first, its blue ribbon catching the fluorescent light. Behind it, 2 purple hearts, the ribbons faded to the color of old wine. "Mom," Marcus said, his voice cracking across the word, "they need to see these." The room went silent. Not the silence of quiet. The silence of a moment recognizing its own weight. Commander Reyes was at the back of the room, in his wheelchair, and when he heard Marcus speak, heard the word "Mom," his head lifted like something had struck him. He was moving forward before anyone could process what was happening, rolling his wheelchair across the polished floor toward the medals in Marcus's hands. His eyes were reading the citations, the words that Katie had never spoken aloud, had never let anyone see. "Captain Catherine Morrison," Commander Reyes said, and his voice was the voice of a man reading scripture, "for extraordinary heroism under fire, evacuating 12 wounded including 1 critically injured child, while sustaining 2 gunshot wounds." He looked up at Katie standing in the doorway. "Angel 6, he whispered. That was her call sign in Ramadi. That was the name they called her when she walked toward the sound of gunfire instead of away from it. "You're Angel 6. Dr. Pierce's face had gone the color of hospital walls. A 2-star general who'd been sitting quietly in the corner of the boardroom stood and saluted Katie's medals, a full military salute, fist to chest. Beside him, a man in a charcoal suit opened a folder marked classified and spoke her operational codename aloud. The one that only the Pentagon knew. The one that meant naval intelligence had authorized her presence here. The one that meant this entire hospital had just learned that the nurse they'd fired was an active intelligence officer. Pierce stumbled backward, his hand reaching for the table to steady himself. But that wasn't the worst part for him. The worst part walked in 30 seconds later. A man in his 50s, still wearing a Navy IT specialist uniform, Chen embroidered on his pocket. He was holding a flash drive that looked no bigger than his thumb, and he was holding it toward the board with the expression of someone delivering a warhead. "Every security footage from the pediatric ward for the past 4 months," Chen said quietly. "Every email. Every billing record." He turned to Pierce. "You asked me to delete the footage 3 separate times. Last Tuesday, you tried to purge the Medicare billing records at 2 a.m. using your personal credentials. I locked the system and called the FBI that morning." Chen looked at Pierce with the steady gaze of a man who understood exactly what he'd just done. "They have a warrant for your arrest. Agents are in the lobby now. They've been waiting for you to show up." Pierce's hand went to his coat. He was thinking about the stairwell. The parking garage. The 4-hour drive to the state line. Katie could see it in his face, in the calculation happening behind his eyes. She'd seen that calculation before, in other men's faces, when they realized the game was ending and they'd lost. He moved toward the door. 2 federal agents were waiting in the hallway. They were the kind of agents who'd done this before, calm, methodical, utterly unmoved by the presence of a 2-star general or a classified folder or any of the institutional authority in the room. "Dr. Richard Pierce," one of them said, "we have a warrant for your arrest for Medicare fraud, insurance fraud, and patient endangerment. You have the right to remain silent." They found $2.3 million in fraudulent billing on his personal laptop. 18 months of phantom consultations. 17 pediatric patients whose therapy had been systematically withheld while Pierce billed their parents' insurance companies for procedures that never happened. The conspiracy wasn't just about money. It was about leverage, knowing which military families to target, which children whose parents would be too overwhelmed by grief and bureaucracy to question the paperwork. The board voted unanimously to reinstate Katie with back pay. They issued a formal apology that felt like something said in a waiting room before bad news. But words didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that the conspiracy was broken. What mattered was that the next hospital would be warned. What mattered was that Miguel was still alive because someone had stayed. 6 months later, Katie stood in the parking lot of the Federal Correctional Facility in Florence, Colorado. The thermometer on the fence read 104 degrees. The heat rose off the asphalt in waves, making the air shimmer like water. A medical supply van pulled across the yard, and a man in an orange jumpsuit drove it slowly between the buildings, his face sunburned and hollow, his eyes dead in the way of men who understood that they would never have authority again. Dr. Pierce saw her standing there beside the fence. He didn't slow down. She didn't wave. They simply looked at each other for the space of 3 seconds, and then he was gone, driving toward the next delivery, the next day of penance, carrying supplies to people he would never help again. At St. Michael's new rehabilitation facility in North Colorado Springs, Miguel Reyes gripped the parallel bars with both hands, his father on one side, Katie on the other. The boy's legs trembled as he took one supported step, then another. 14 months of therapy that should have been discontinued. 14 months of believing that Captain Catherine Morrison, the woman whose name was tattooed on his arm, would come back. 14 months of his father reading him her citation every night before bed. The boy stared at the letters on his forearm, Morrison. Then he looked up at her face. His lips formed the word slowly, carefully, as if he was building it sound by sound. Morrison. Katie's hand covered his. I'm here, Miguel. I've always been here. Commander Reyes saluted her. The full formal salute. She returned it. That evening, Katie sat in Marcus's apartment, the Navy Cross on the coffee table between them, catching the light from the window. Why didn't you ever tell me? Marcus asked. His phone was on the table too, the footage of Miguel taking those first steps still open on the screen. Katie touched the faded unit patch, now framed on her wall at home. The patch that had started everything, that had brought her to Colorado, to St. Michael's, to Miguel, to this moment. Because the people who need help don't care about medals, she said quietly. They care about who shows up. They care about who stays. She opened Miguel's chart on her tablet. His progress notes showed voluntary movement returning, nerve response improving, sensation in his lower extremities. The other doctors had changed their opinions. 5 of them now agreeing that continued therapy was warranted. 5 doctors who'd been wrong, and who'd admitted it. Marcus read the final line of her citation aloud. Captain Morrison's actions under fire exemplify the highest traditions of military service. Katie shook her head. The real work started after the fire stopped. True heroism is what you do when the world stops watching. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your story, like this video. If you believe that the quiet ones often carry the greatest strength, subscribe and hit that notification bell. And in the comments, tell us, what would you have done in Katie's position? Would you have walked away, or would you have stayed?